So we are back with some more Fallout 76 news and actually analysis of certain interviews. This video is going to be a little bit different. I'm actually looking at a number of different interviews. From June 27th to 29th was actually Gamelab Barcelona, a gaming conference obviously taking place in Barcelona. This conference, when compared to E3, is without a doubt appealing more to a multilingual crowd. It's not as English focused, and even the website itself isn't in English. And this has been the source of a lot of these international interviews we're getting with Todd Howard. I've actually covered two of them thus far, that with GameStar.de as well as Multiplayer.it, a German and Italian website. I'm going to have them linked in a little eye if you want to check those out, but either way, what we're doing in this one is actually looking at kind of three different interviews or three different talking points that other articles have come out on. I figured I'd put them all together in one video because they all have interesting points, but I don't think they justify individual videos for each of them. Either way, first and foremost, we actually have one from GameIndustry.biz. They talked with Todd Howard at this conference, and specifically they talk about the future of Bethesda in relation to service-based games. So Fallout 76 is going to be a game as a service. This is something that's been confirmed in the past. We are going to be getting free DLC content, that being DLCs small and large, to keep the player base united so everyone can play all the DLC content together, because, you know, it's a multiplayer game this time. But in order to actually fund the game, they are going to have microtransactions. As of right now, they have confirmed aesthetic things such as different skins. We've actually seen a few of those in the trailer, but all those different things will be earnable through the vanilla game through grinding or something like that. You can get them for free, even if it might take a lot longer to just pay for them. Bethesda Game Studios today remains as one of the few places that are actually still doing predominantly single-player games. A lot of other game companies have largely moved to online games and games as a service with microtransactions, loot boxes, things like that. Well, Todd Howard's response to this, and there's no like explicit question, but they just kind of show his response, it doesn't mark the future. Corporately, we've done a mix. People forget sometimes. Elder Scrolls Online is one of the biggest online games in the world. We have Fallout Shelter, which we keep updating, and Elder Scrolls Legends. Anyone who has ever said this is the future and this part of gaming is dead has been proven wrong every single time. We like to try it all. For a long time, we wanted to try a multiplayer game. We had this idea. We shouldn't be afraid. We should try it. So what I take away from that is Todd Howard's more or less saying, even though they're not 100% focused on multiplayer games as a service, they still have them. They are within the ranks of the Bethesda Softworks portfolio, and even more specifically using those IPs made famous by Bethesda Game Studios, the Elder Scrolls and Fallout. Fallout Shelter was a massive success for that company and actually is the most played game from Bethesda Game Studios ever, beating out Skyrim and Fallout 4, which I imagine would be the two runner-ups in that category. Todd Howard kind of goes on to mention how he oftentimes wants a lighter touch with monetization methods. So in some of these games that have a lot of microtransactions, people have recommended he put in more microtransactions, but he's always chosen to have less and actually had to kind of get rid of people or change monetization advisors as a result of this. Then he goes on to explain how it has obviously worked. Fallout Shelter is their most played game and was at the top of the App Store following its release. If they chose some of those more heavy-handed and more in-your-face monetization techniques, that could have had an issue. They may have not seen the same results they're seeing right now, with that being a massively successful game. He says that monetization should come from kind of many different sources, or his exact quote, many areas of attack. And the mentality is, how do we keep somebody who's been playing the game a lot? How do we give them value beyond, here's a timer, give us money? And that being in many games, you actually can pay to skip through the timer. So for me, one of the major takeaways here is, like many other things that Todd Howard has kind of said or revealed over the past few weeks, Fallout 76 is a spin-off game. It is going to be distinctive from the other iterations in their overall portfolio. So even though, yes, Fallout 76 is going to be an always online multiplayer game that doesn't really feature that traditional single-player experience and will be a game as a service featuring microtransactions as well as free DLC. He doesn't want people to think that is the future of them. That's why they announced games like Starfield and the Elder Scrolls 6 at the C3. We've gotten confirmation on the multiplayer aspect, but seemingly here he's saying that a lot of those future single player games aren't going to really feature that games as a service technique as heavily as Fallout 76. Of course, it's going to still be present in the mobile games, and it's still going to be present, I'm sure, in the Elder Scrolls Blades because they want to monetize the game, and I'm pretty sure it's free to download. But they're still maintaining that mentality they had with Fallout Shelter because it worked so well with Fallout Shelter. Fallout Shelter definitely was an enjoyable game. It had microtransactions and loot boxes, but I don't know, I didn't hate it. I didn't really play very many mobile games, and Fallout Shelter is one of the few I still have installed on my phone. And although all of this sounds really nice and exciting, it still is kind of concerning for me. I don't think Grand Theft Auto actually expected the success of Grand Theft Auto Online when they went into making GTA 5. If you don't know, Grand Theft Auto was actually planned to have a bunch of single-player DLCs or a bunch more single-player DLCs, but with the online aspect of that game being so successful, they moved away from that. That won't really be a problem in Fallout 76, but alright, now let's say Fallout 5, due to the success of Fallout 76, gets that same multiplayer component. It gets an upgraded version of Fallout 76's online survival aspect, as well as having just a traditional single-player aspect. And then as the online component starts to become more and more successful, it starts to eat away more at the single player component. Obviously, Bethesda is still dedicated to single player games, but my fear is less for their overall franchises and more for the Fallout franchise. If a multiplayer Fallout becomes massively successful, I could really see that changing the tone of future games, because why would they pass up on that success? It's game sales that they're not going to be able to garner if they ignore multiplayer going forward. And I know some of you will take that as, oh, I think Bethesda is ruining Fallout, and that's really not the case. I'm just concerned about the future of the franchise based on how this current game performs. I think we could see a dramatic shift in Fallout 5. It's not going to be exactly like Fallout 4. That could be a good thing, but it also could be a bad thing, and only time will tell. So then from another article, it's actually Todd Howard on VR. This is going to be from a separate article, but from the same event in Barcelona. Todd says that he's definitely more of a fan of VR over AR, and the real interesting takeaway is the line where he says, "We did Fallout and Skyrim in VR. We're just about to enter the second generation of VR. Historically, the third generation is where it starts to become popular." I find this interesting because Todd has said in previous interviews, Bethesda Game Studios has never really been much of a trend follower, not necessarily a trendsetter either, but they do their own thing. They do what they think is going to work. With Fallout 76, they happen to be making an online survival game in a kind of glory day of online survival games, but that was more just of a coincidence. They wanted to work on a multiplayer online survival Fallout for a very long time, and this is just when they happened to do it. It's not like they planned this trying to hope for this to actually be the peak period. Well, now with the same mentality with VR, if Todd Howard truly believes that down the line, the third generation of VR, let's say that's 3-4 years away, is going to really be that same peak period, maybe that's when we'll start seeing some of these first party IPs actually getting shifted to that. Maybe Starfield will get a VR port way sooner than Fallout 76 or Fallout 4. If you follow the VR scene, you'll know Bethesda has stood out as being one of the few companies really taking it by storm. Obviously, Fallout 4 and Skyrim have been ported over to VR, with Skyrim even being on PSVR. Also at this E3, it was just revealed that Prey is actually coming to VR, which is an awesome game and an even cooler game to experience in VR. Doom VFR already has been released, as well as Wolfenstein got its own little spin-off game that is coming as a VR exclusive. The company as a whole is without a doubt more VR focused than pretty much anybody else that I could think of. And Todd Howard really embracing it is interesting. Obviously, it's going to be heavily speculation as to what that means, but I think in the future you may see some of their new games be ported to VR either right away or very quickly. And that's really exciting. I have a VR headset, I have a Vive right now. I don't love it. It's definitely not my favorite thing in the world. I would still rather sit down and play traditionally, but I see the potential. I think once they get some of those resolution things sorted and maybe some of the streaming and recording aspects to be a little bit more enjoyable for an audience, it's going to have a massive spike and takeoff. The price is also a pretty big barrier to entry, but that has definitely been decreasing, especially now with the secondhand market growing as the second generation does get released. So last but not least, we have an article from GameBeat. They also did an interview, and I don't know why, but a lot of these interviews from this Barcelona conference aren't coming out in the traditional sense. Like a bunch of them are initially released as just one of the quotes from that interview turned into an entire article without the actual interview transcript being published, and this one's in like a list form, like the 10 big takeaways from Todd Howard at this conference. Either way, one of those major takeaways is, if you haven't seen, Bethesda is actually suing Warner Bros. And Behavior Interactive over a Westworld mobile game, Behavior Interactive being the developers behind Fallout Shelter. I made a full video on that. If you want to check it out, I will have it linked in the little eye. And although it's not really a major takeaway, Todd Howard in this actually says he had to play the game for legal reasons, to actually give them an opinion as to whether or not, or seemingly whether or not, it was ripping off the same code. That's the claim in the lawsuit, is that they actually physically reuse the same lines of code from Fallout Shelter in this new Westworld game. So something pretty interesting that's highlighted in this interview that I didn't even think about myself is on Starfield. So they talk a bit about Starfield and how behind the scenes at Bethesda, they've actually been planning for 10 years to make Starfield. This is something we semi-knew. In an interview, Todd Howard said he had a list of games or game genres he wanted to make at some point. Before he made that list, there was multiple attempts from Bethesda at actually making a sci-fi or space-based game, so it was plausible, and many people speculated that space or sci-fi would be on that list, and hence the Starfield trademark was real for Bethesda Game Studios. That was all back in the speculation days, but obviously now that is coming to fruition. This is something we've seen in a past interview, but Todd reaffirms here that after Fallout 4 finished, the game they immediately started working on was Starfield. Fallout 76 was only worked on by their Austin branch, the former Battlecry Studios. The interesting takeaway being, let's say Bethesda worked on Starfield for a year and a half. That certainly makes it seem like it could be much closer to release than, it doesn't have like a full development cycle still. Although most of the development team is focused on Fallout 76, as soon as that game gets released, maybe Starfield could only be a couple years away rather than the traditional 4 to 5 that we see from Bethesda. I say that both as speculative and hopeful though. But on the same topic of Starfield, Todd actually talks about how it's a bit more difficult for him because with all the other games he's made, you can actually go back and play the one before it. Starfield obviously being a totally new IP, there's nothing to go back and play. You're starting from the ground up, and it's the first game he's actually building from the ground up at Bethesda. Or to be more specific, the first game franchise he's building from the ground up at Bethesda. And the exact quote is, "I enjoy +1 sequels as a player, I don't enjoy making them." They say he played the game Fortnite for research. You could take from that whatever you want. And on the topic of doing a book or a movie with one of their franchises, presumably Fallout or the Elder Scrolls, I know a lot of us would love a Fallout like series on Netflix or HBO or something like that. And Todd says he has no interest in this. I can't really tell from the quote and the actual way the article paraphrases this if he means he doesn't want those franchises to go there or if he means he doesn't want to make them. One of the exact quotes is, "Games are where I want to be," but does that mean he doesn't want Fallout to be anywhere except a video game, or for him to not actually make anything but a video game? And that's largely it. Honestly, there's a few interesting takeaways. I feel like this one, more so than actual details about Fallout 76, was more details about Bethesda as a company and the direction they're heading in going forward. But I still think there are a lot of interesting takeaways. The VR spectrum, the actual games as a service spectrum, and whether or not Bethesda is going to have more of that going forward or kind of maintain the level they have right now, with it largely being mobile and spin-off games, but one of their main franchises are now taking it on. And although yes, they obviously did that with Elder Scrolls Legends and the Elder Scrolls Online, I feel like that was very different. It was a different developer, and it's just, I don't think those are super comparable to Fallout 76. Either way, that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this video. All these articles were really interesting, but I didn't think any of them actually deserved their own video, so I wanted to combine them into one kind of super video. As always, again, I thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.